The knock after dark. What would you do if a desperate mother appeared at your door in the dead of night, fleeing a monster who claimed to own her? Ethan Cole, a lone cowboy on the Wyoming frontier, made a choice that would draw a line in blood and change 3 lives forever. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels across the land. The wind came hard across the Wyoming territory that November night, carrying the bite of winter and the loneliness that settles on a man when he's lived too long without the sound of another voice. Ethan Cole stood at the window of his timber cabin, watching darkness swallow the last trace of amber from the western sky. Beyond the glass, sage and stone stretched for miles in every direction, a landscape that asked nothing and gave less. He preferred it that way. The fire crackled behind him, casting shadows that danced across rough-hewn walls. His coffee had gone cold in the tin cup he'd been nursing for the better part of an hour. Outside, his horses shifted in the corral, their breath steaming in the frozen air. The night settled into the kind of silence that made a man hear his own heartbeat. Then came the knock, soft, uncertain, almost apologetic. Ethan's hand moved to the Colt revolver on his hip before his mind fully registered the sound. Nobody knocked on doors out here. Neighbors were 15 miles in any direction, and the kind of men who traveled after dark didn't announce themselves with courtesy. The knock came again, lighter this time, as if the hand behind it was losing strength. He crossed the cabin in 4 strides, rifle now in hand, and positioned himself to the side of the door. "State your business." Silence. Then a woman's voice, thin and breaking. "Please, my daughter, she's sick. We just need somewhere warm, just for tonight." Ethan's jaw tightened. A woman. A child. And desperation in every syllable. He pulled the door open, rifle lowered but ready. What he found made something old and buried shift inside his chest. She couldn't have been more than 25, though the hollow shadows under her eyes aged her. Her dress was torn at the hem, caked with trail dust and something darker. Dried blood, maybe, or mud from a hard fall. Her hair hung in tangled waves around a face that might have been beautiful if it wasn't etched with exhaustion and fear. But it was the child in her arms that stopped his breath. A little girl, no more than 4 years old, lay limp against her mother's shoulder. Her small face burned fever red, her breathing shallow and labored. The woman's arms trembled from the weight of holding her, trembled from cold, trembled from whatever had brought them to his door in the middle of nowhere after midnight. "Please," the woman whispered again. Her eyes met his, brown and deep and drowning. "Just the barn. We won't trouble you. I just need her out of the wind." Ethan looked past them into the darkness. No horse, no wagon, no supplies. They'd walked here then. Walked miles through territory where wolves hunted and temperatures dropped fast enough to kill. They were running. And whatever they were running from had teeth. He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come inside." The woman blinked, surprise flickering across her features. "The barn is fine, truly. We don't need—" "You'll freeze in the barn." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Both of you, get in here." She hesitated one more heartbeat, then stumbled across the threshold. Ethan caught her elbow as she swayed, steadying her. Up close, he could see the bruise shadowing her jaw, the split in her lower lip that had scabbed over days ago. The story written on her skin made his blood run cold. He shut the door against the night and turned to find her standing in the center of his cabin, looking lost. The child whimpered, a small sound that cut through the room like broken glass. "Put her on the bed." Ethan gestured to the narrow cot against the far wall. "I'll build up the fire." "I can't take your bed. We'll just—" "Do it!" He was already moving, feeding split logs into the wood stove, coaxing the flames higher. "When's the last time she ate?" The woman lowered the child onto the rough wool blanket with a gentleness that spoke of practice, of nights spent protecting something more precious than her own life. "Yesterday morning. Maybe. I'm not sure anymore." Ethan pulled the coffee pot from the stove and dumped the cold dregs into the basin. His movements were efficient, economical, the actions of a man who'd lived alone long enough to need no wasted motion. He filled a clean pot with water from the barrel by the door, added oats and a pinch of salt, set it to heat. There's broth from last night's rabbit, and bread if it hasn't gone too hard. He didn't look at her as he spoke, focusing instead on the simple arithmetic of survival. Warmth, food, water. The basics that kept a body breathing. What's her name? Maggie. The woman's voice cracked on the word. Her name is Maggie. And yours? A pause, long enough that he glanced back. She stood beside the bed, one hand resting on her daughter's burning forehead, her eyes measuring him with the wariness of a wild thing deciding whether to bolt or trust. Lena Hart. He nodded once. Ethan Cole. This is my land, such as it is. You're safe here tonight. Something in her face shifted, not quite belief, but the desperate hope that belief might be possible. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He ladled broth into a tin bowl, found a piece of bread that was only half stale, brought both to the bedside. She needs to drink, even if it's just a few sips. Lena sank onto the edge of the cot and gathered Maggie into her lap with practiced care. The child's eyes fluttered open, fever-bright and unfocused. Mama? I'm here, sweetheart. Lena's voice transformed, shedding its exhaustion to become something soft and steady. We're somewhere safe, somewhere warm. Can you drink a little for Mama? Ethan watched as she coaxed the child to take small sips, her whole world narrowing to that one task. The fierce concentration on her face, the tenderness in her hands. He recognized it, had seen it before. In another lifetime, in another woman's eyes. The memory twisted like a knife, and he turned away. I'll sleep by the fire, he said, pulling his bedroll from the corner. You take the bed with her. There's a latch on the inside of the door. Use it if it makes you feel easier. Lena looked up sharply. You don't have to. I do. He spread the bedroll on the floor near the stove, where the heat would be strongest. Out here, there's what's right and what's easy. They're not usually the same thing. He settled onto the bedroll, his back to the bed, and listened to the small sounds of a mother caring for her child. The whispered encouragements, the soft humming of a lullaby. The creak of the cot as Lena finally laid down beside Maggie, curling her body around the little girl like a shield. The fire popped and hissed. Outside, the wind prowled around the cabin, searching for cracks. Ethan stared into the flames and knew, with the certainty of a man who'd learned to read the land, that this night was just the beginning. Whatever storm had driven Lena Hart to his door was still coming, still hunting, and when it arrived, he'd have to decide who he was. The man who'd learned to survive alone, or the man he'd been before he forgot how to protect anything that mattered. Dawn came slow and gray, leaking through the window in pale threads. Ethan woke to the smell of fever sweat and the sound of labored breathing. He was on his feet before conscious thought, crossing to the bed in 2 strides. Maggie's small body shook with chills despite the blankets piled over her. Her skin burned to the touch, dry and papery. Lena sat upright beside her, eyes red-rimmed and wild. She's worse, Lena whispered. I hoped. But she's worse. Ethan knelt beside the bed, his hand gentle on the child's forehead. Burning. He'd seen this before, fever that climbed and climbed until it burned away everything that made a person who they were. Sometimes they came back. Sometimes they didn't. We need to bring it down. He stood, moving with purpose. Cold water, willow bark if I can find any. He paused, looking back at Lena. There's a trading post about 8 miles south. They might have laudanum or something stronger. No. The word came sharp, edged with panic. No towns, no people. Please. He studied her face, the fear there as real and raw as the child's fever. Lena, she needs. I can't. Her voice broke. If he finds us, if anyone tells him. She stopped, swallowing hard. Please. Whatever you can do here, just here. Ethan held her gaze for a long moment. In it, he saw the truth she hadn't spoken. This wasn't illness they were running from. It was a man. A man who'd put that bruise on her jaw, that split in her lip, that terror in her eyes. A man who'd come looking. All right, he said quietly. We do it here. He spent the morning moving between the cabin and the creek, hauling water in buckets that froze his hands numb. Lena bathed Maggie with cloths soaked in cold water, speaking to her in a constant stream of gentle words, even when the child was too lost in fever to hear them. By noon, Ethan had found willow bark growing near the water's edge. Winter bare, but usable. He boiled it into a bitter tea while Lena coaxed Maggie to drink, one painful sip at a time. "You're good at this," Lena said softly, watching him work. "Taking care of people." His hand stilled on the pot. "Was. Long time ago." She waited, but he didn't elaborate. Some stories were better left buried. The afternoon dragged on in a rhythm of water and waiting. Ethan kept the fire stoked, kept the cabin warm, kept watch through the window at the empty land beyond. Every hour he checked Maggie's temperature with the back of his hand. Every hour the fever held its ground. Lena barely moved from the bedside. She sang songs Ethan didn't recognize, told stories about places he'd never been, held her daughter's small hand like it was the only thing anchoring her to earth. "Tell me about your family," Ethan said as evening crept in, more to keep Lena awake than out of curiosity. Her laugh came hollow. "I don't have family, not anymore. Just Maggie." She smoothed the child's damp hair back from her forehead. "My parents died when I was 16. Fever, ironically. I was working in a boarding house in St. Louis when I met Victor." Her mouth twisted on the name. "He seemed kind, steady, offered me something I thought was safety." "Victor." Ethan's voice flattened. "That who you're running from?" She nodded, eyes fixed on her daughter. "He's Maggie's father. We were never married, not legally, but he told everyone I was his wife, told me I belonged to him, that Maggie belonged to him." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "When she was born, I thought maybe he'd soften, that having a child would change him. It didn't. No." The word fell like a stone. "It got worse. He drank more, got meaner, started saying things about what he'd do to her when she was older, the way he looked at her sometimes." She stopped, her breath hitching. "3 nights ago, I heard him tell his brother that Maggie was getting to be a pretty little thing. The way he said it," Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "I waited until he passed out drunk, took what I could carry, started walking." She looked up at Ethan then, her eyes fierce despite the exhaustion. "I'll keep walking as long as I have to. He'll never touch her. I'll die first." "You won't have to die." Ethan's voice came quiet, certain. "And neither will she." Lena studied him in the firelight, this hard, silent man who'd opened his door to strangers, given up his bed, spent a day fighting to save a child who wasn't his. "Why are you helping us?" He was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old ghosts. "I had a family once. Wife, daughter, about Maggie's age. I was working a cattle drive 3 states away when cholera came through their town." He paused, the muscle in his jaw working. "Got word 2 weeks after they died. 2 weeks I could have been there, could have tried to save them, could have at least said goodbye. Ethan, I came back to an empty house, buried them myself, and I swore His voice roughened, broke. "I swore I'd never be too late again. Never turn away from someone who needed help. Never choose the easy road over the right one." He looked at her then, his eyes hard with resolve. "So you don't have to thank me, Lena. This is for them as much as it is for you." The cabin fell quiet except for the crackle of flames and Maggie's labored breathing. Outside, night settled over the territory like a held breath. Then, just before midnight, something changed. Maggie's breathing eased. The terrible heat began to recede from her skin. Her eyes opened, clear for the first time in days, and found her mother's face. "Mama?" The word came small and confused. "Where are we?" Lena made a sound between a laugh and a sob, gathering her daughter close. "Somewhere safe, baby. Somewhere safe." Ethan stood and turned away, giving them privacy for their reunion, but not before Lena looked up and mouthed 2 words across the firelight. "Thank you." He nodded once and stepped outside into the cold. The stars burned overhead, sharp and infinite. The land stretched dark and silent in every direction. Somewhere out there, A man named Victor was hunting, searching, getting closer with every passing hour. Ethan knew with the bone-deep certainty of experience that the knock on his door hadn't been chance. It had been fate, the kind that asks a man to choose who he'll be when everything goes to hell. He'd made his choice the moment he let them inside. Now he'd live with whatever came next. Morning of the second day dawned clear and cold. Maggie sat up in bed for the first time, weak but alert, asking for water in a voice that sounded like music after the silence of fever. Lena cried quiet tears of relief while she fed her daughter small bites of softened bread. Ethan made coffee and watched them from across the room, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. The cabin felt different with their presence, warmer somehow, despite the same fire and the same stove. He'd forgotten what it was like to hear a child's laughter, even the tired, fragile sound of it. Forgotten what it meant to not be alone. "She should rest another day," he said, refilling Lena's cup. "Maybe two. The fever might have broken, but she's not strong enough for travel." Lena looked up, conflict plain on her face. "We've already taken so much of your time, your space." "I've got nothing but time." He settled into the chair by the fire, his long legs stretched toward the heat. "And the space isn't doing anybody any good empty. Victor, let me worry about Victor." The name hung between them like smoke. Lena's hands tightened around her cup, knuckles going white. "You don't know him, what he's capable of." "I know men like him." Ethan's voice went flat, edged with something cold. "Known plenty. They're all the same under the bluster. Cowards who only feel big when they're hurting something smaller." He met her eyes. "And they all bleed the same when you stand up to them." A knock shattered the morning quiet. Not soft this time. Not uncertain, hard, demanding. The sound of knuckles on wood backed by authority and threat. Maggie whimpered, shrinking against her mother. Lena went pale, her whole body going rigid with recognition. She knew that knock. Knew what it meant. Ethan was already moving, rifle in hand, positioning himself between the door and the bed. "Get behind the stove," he said quietly. "Both of you, stay low." "Ethan, now." Lena grabbed Maggie and scrambled toward the far corner, tucking themselves into the small space between the stove and the wall. Ethan waited until they were hidden, then called out, his voice carrying easy authority. "State your business. Open the door, friend." The voice from outside was smooth, practiced, carrying the kind of friendliness that didn't reach the threat underneath. "We're looking for someone. Won't take but a minute of your time." Ethan recognized the tone. Lawmen used it, bounty hunters, men who expected compliance because they were used to getting it. He moved to the window, angling for a view without exposing himself. 3 men on horseback. The one in front sat tall in the saddle, well-dressed for the territory in a wool coat and wide-brimmed hat. Dark hair, dark eyes, a smile that probably charmed barmaids and intimidated shopkeepers. Handsome enough, if you didn't look too close at the coldness in his gaze. Victor Hale. Had to be. The 2 riders behind him were rougher stock, hired muscle with guns on their hips and mean written in the set of their shoulders. Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. 3 against 1. Not terrible odds if it came to shooting, but not good either. Not with a woman and child to protect. The knock came again, harder. "I know you're in there. Saw smoke from your chimney a mile off. Just want to have a conversation man to man." Behind the stove, Maggie started to cry. A thin, frightened sound that she tried to muffle against her mother's shoulder. Lena's eyes met Ethan's across the room, wide with terror and apology and desperate hope. He made his decision. Ethan propped the rifle against the wall where he could reach it fast, pulled the Colt from his hip and tucked it in his belt at the small of his back, then opened the door just wide enough to step outside, pulling it shut behind him. The morning cold hit him like a fist, but he didn't react. Just stood on his porch, arms loose at his sides, and met Victor Hale's dark eyes with a gaze that gave away nothing. "Help you with something?" Victor's smile widened, showing teeth. "Hope so, friend. Name's Victor Hale. I'm looking for my wife and daughter. They went missing a few nights back, and I've been worried sick." He leaned forward in his saddle, all false concern and practiced charm. "Pretty woman, mid-20s, traveling with a little girl, about 4 years old. You seen anyone like that pass through?" "This is private land," Ethan said, his voice flat. Don't get much traffic. Sure, sure. Victor nodded like they were sharing confidences. Remote out here. That's why I'm checking every homestead within 20 miles. Lena, that's my wife. She's not well. Gets confused sometimes. Wanders off. I'm afraid she might have gotten lost, maybe hurt herself in the little one. His expression shifted to something meant to be sympathy. You understand. A man's got to protect his family. The word family landed like a stone in poisoned water. Ethan didn't blink. Haven't seen anyone. Victor's smile thinned. The mask slipped just for a second, showing the thing underneath, cold calculation and barely leashed rage. You sure about that? Wouldn't want to be keeping information from a worried husband. Wouldn't want to be sheltering someone who doesn't belong to you. The threat came wrapped in courtesy, but it was a threat all the same. I'm sure, Ethan said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got work to do. He started to turn back toward the door. Wait. The word cracked like a whip. Ethan stopped, his hand near the door handle, every muscle in his body coiling tight. Victor swung down from his saddle in one smooth motion, his boots hitting the frozen ground with deliberate weight. He took 3 steps toward the porch, close enough that Ethan could smell the pomade in his hair, the whiskey on his breath. See, here's the thing, friend. Victor's voice dropped, losing its false warmth. I've been tracking them for 3 days, found signs of a woman and child walking this direction. Lost the trail about 2 miles south of here when the wind picked up. He cocked his head, studying Ethan like a man assessing livestock. This is the only cabin within 5 miles. So either they walked right past you, in the dark, in the cold, with a sick child, or they're inside right now. Ethan held his ground. I told you, haven't seen anyone. You calling me a liar? I'm saying you're on my land uninvited. Time for you to leave. For a long moment, nobody moved. The 2 hired men shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their guns. Victor's eyes went flat and reptilian, his jaw working. Then he smiled again, bright and terrible. You know what I think? Victor said softly. I think you're a lonely man out here in the middle of nowhere. I think maybe a pretty woman knocked on your door, told you some sob story, and you believed her because you wanted to. He took another step closer. But here's what you don't know. That woman is mine. She stole my daughter. She's got no rights, no claim, no protection under any law. His voice turned to steel. And you're just some nobody on a patch of dirt that doesn't even have a proper deed. So I'm going to walk into that cabin, take what's mine, and if you try to stop me, then I'll put a bullet in you. The words came quiet, absolute, carrying the weight of a promise. Victor's smile froze. You threatening me? I'm telling you how this ends if you take one more step toward that door. Ethan's hand moved to rest on the Colt at his hip, casual, ready. I don't care what story you're selling or what lies you tell yourself. There's a woman and child in my cabin, and they're under my protection. You want them, you go through me. The air crackled with violence waiting to happen. The hired men exchanged glances, hands on their weapons now, waiting for Victor's signal. Victor's face flushed dark, rage finally breaking through the mask. You don't know who you're dealing with. Don't need to. Ethan's voice stayed level, cold as the morning frost. I know what you are. Seen 100 like you. Men who think ownership is the same as love, who think fear is the same as respect. He shifted his weight, balanced on the balls of his feet, ready. You're not taking them. Not today. Not ever. Now get off my land before I put you in it. For 3 heartbeats, the world balanced on the edge of a knife. Then Victor laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. All right, friend, have it your way. He backed toward his horse, never taking his eyes off Ethan. But you think about this. Really think about it. How long can you stay awake? How many bullets do you have? How many friends? He swung into the saddle with violent grace. I've got men. I've got resources. And I've got all the time in the world. He wheeled his horse around, his hired guns falling in behind him. But before they rode off, Victor turned back one last time. Enjoy playing hero while it lasts, he called out. But heroes out here? They tend to die alone. Then they were gone, disappearing into the sage and stone, leaving nothing but dust and the echo of hoofbeats. Ethan stood on the porch long after the sound faded, watching the horizon, his hand still on his gun. The cold seeped into his bones, but he didn't move. Couldn't, not yet. Not until he was sure they were truly gone. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Lena stood in the doorway, Maggie clutched in her arms, her face streaked with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I should never have. We'll leave. Right now. We'll go, and he won't. No." She stopped, blinking. Ethan turned to face her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Not anger, not regret. Something harder, more certain, the look of a man who'd drawn a line and meant to hold it. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "Not today. Not because of him." He looked past her into the cabin at Maggie's pale, frightened face. A man makes a stand. He sees it through. That's all there is to it. "He'll come back," Lena said, desperation creeping into her voice. "With more men, with guns. He'll—" "Let him come." Ethan's voice carried the finality of stone. "I've got bullets enough. And I've been dead inside for 5 years. He met her eyes. "But you're still fighting, still protecting her. That's worth something. That's worth standing for." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither of them had intended but both understood. Lena's tears spilled over, but she nodded, small, fierce, grateful. Ethan stepped past her into the cabin, already planning, checking ammunition, calculating angles of fire, preparing for the storm he knew was coming, because Victor Hale had told the truth about one thing. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. The cabin felt smaller after Victor left, as if the walls themselves had drawn inward, closing around the weight of what was coming. Ethan moved through the space with deliberate purpose, checking the rifle's action, counting cartridges, measuring angles from windows to the tree line where riders might approach. His hands worked with the efficiency of long practice, but his mind was already 3 moves ahead, calculating odds and outcomes. Lena sat on the edge of the bed with Maggie curled in her lap, watching him with eyes that held equal parts gratitude and guilt. The child had finally stopped crying, worn down to exhausted silence, her small fingers twisted in her mother's torn dress. "How long do we have?" Lena asked quietly. Ethan didn't pause in his preparations. "Hard to say. He'll need to gather more men if he's smart, convince them it's worth their time. Could be hours, could be days." He pulled back the curtain on the north window, studying the approach. "But he won't wait long. Men like that, they don't think, they react. Ego's been bruised. He'll come back hot. There has to be another way. We could slip out the back, head east through the—" "No." Ethan turned to face her, his expression carved from granite. "You run now. You'll be running forever. And winter's coming on hard. You wouldn't make it 10 miles with a child that week." He gestured to Maggie, whose eyes were already drooping despite her fear. "She needs rest, food, time to get her strength back. And you need us gone before you get killed for helping strangers." Lena's voice broke on the last word. "I won't have your blood on my hands, Ethan. I won't." He crossed to the bed in 3 strides and knelt down so they were eye level. When he spoke, his voice carried a gentleness that seemed at odds with the hard lines of his face. "You didn't put me in this position. He did, and I made my choice with open eyes." He reached out, hesitated, then let his hand rest briefly on Maggie's small shoulder. "I told you about my wife and daughter. What I didn't say was that for 5 years I've been living half dead, just going through the motions, punishing myself for not being there when it mattered." His jaw tightened. "Maybe this is my chance to get it right, to be there this time." Lena's eyes filled with fresh tears. "You don't owe us anything." "No," he agreed, "but I owe myself this, the chance to be the man I was before grief hollowed me out." He stood, his decision made and settled. "So you stay, we both stay, and we see this through together." The word together hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than either wanted to acknowledge. Maggie stirred, lifting her head with effort. "Mama, I'm hungry." The simple declaration broke the tension. Lena laughed, the sound wet and relieved, and pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "Of course you are, sweetheart. Let's see what we can find." Ethan watched them move toward the small larder, mother and child, battered but unbroken, and felt something ancient and painful crack open in his chest. He'd forgotten this, the simple domesticity of caring for others, the way purpose felt when it extended beyond mere survival. He turned back to the window, scanning the horizon one more time, then made a decision. "I'm going out for a few hours," he said. "There's a box canyon about 3 miles northeast. Good defensive position if we need it. I want to check the approaches, maybe set a few surprises for anyone who comes looking." Lena spun around, alarm flashing across her face. "You're leaving us alone?" "You'll be fine. Door latches from the inside, and I'm leaving you this." He pulled a small derringer from a drawer, checked its load, and set it on the table. 2 shots. Won't stop a man at range, but up close, it'll do the job. He met her eyes. "You know how to shoot?" She nodded slowly. "My father taught me. Before he died." "Good. Anyone comes through that door who isn't me, you aim for center mass and pull the trigger. Don't hesitate. Don't warn them. Just shoot." The hardness in his voice made Maggie shrink closer to her mother, but Lena straightened, squaring her shoulders. "How will I know it's you when you come back?" "I'll knock 3 times, pause, then twice more. That'll be the signal." He shrugged into his heavy coat, settling his hat low on his brow. "I'll be back before dark. Keep the fire going and stay away from the windows." He was halfway to the door when Lena's voice stopped him. "Ethan?" He turned. She stood with one arm around Maggie, the other hand resting on the small pistol, and in her eyes was something fierce and determined. "Thank you for giving us a chance to stop running." He nodded once, then stepped out into the cold Wyoming morning. The land stretched before him in rolling waves of sage and stone, beautiful in its desolation. He saddled his best horse, a gray gelding with good wind and a calm temperament, and rode northeast toward the canyon he'd scouted months ago but never thought he'd need. The sun climbed higher as he rode, burning off the morning frost but bringing no real warmth. Ravens circled overhead, their harsh calls the only sound beyond the creak of leather and the rhythmic beat of hooves on frozen ground. Ethan let his mind empty, focusing on the land, reading it the way some men read books. There, a game trail that would let riders approach from the east unseen. And there, high ground that commanded a view of the cabin. He made mental notes of each vulnerability, each advantage, building a map in his head of how a fight might unfold. The box canyon revealed itself gradually, a slash in the earth guarded by rock walls on 3 sides, and a narrow entrance easily defended. A thin stream ran through it, not yet frozen solid. Winter grass grew in protected pockets. A man could hold this position for days if he had to. Ethan dismounted and spent an hour gathering deadfall, arranging branches across the entrance in a pattern that looked natural but would give way noisily if disturbed. Not a trap exactly, but an early warning system. He scattered a few stones in specific patterns, markers only he would recognize, then stood back to assess his work. Good enough. If they had to run, they'd run here. He was remounting when he heard it. The distant pop of gunfire, faint but unmistakable, carrying on the wind from the direction of his cabin. His blood turned to ice. He kicked the gelding into a gallop, the horse's powerful stride eating up the miles, but time stretched into something elastic and terrible. Every second felt like an hour. Every hoofbeat echoed with the rhythm of his racing heart. Too soon. They came back too soon. The cabin came into view as he crested the last rise, and what he saw made his breath stop. 2 horses stood in front of his porch, their riders nowhere visible. Smoke still drifted from the chimney, but the door hung open, swinging in the wind. No sounds, no movement. Ethan pulled his rifle from its scabbard and approached at a walk, every sense screaming. He scanned the windows, the roofline, the spaces between the outbuildings. Nothing. Then he saw the blood, a dark smear on the porch steps, a spray of droplets leading toward the door. Too much to be nothing, too fresh to be old. He dismounted 20 yards out, moving on foot now, rifle raised and ready. His boots made no sound on the frozen ground. Years of hunting had taught him how to move like smoke, like shadow. The first body lay just inside the door. One of Victor's hired men, the younger one with the scar across his jaw. He'd been shot in the chest at close range, the entry wound still weeping blood. His eyes stared sightless at the ceiling, his gun still holstered. Ethan stepped over him, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Lena?" Silence. He moved deeper into the cabin, rifle sweeping left and right. The furniture had been overturned, table on its side, chairs scattered. The Derringer lay empty on the floor, both rounds spent. "Lena!" A soft whimper came from behind the overturned stove. Ethan spun, and there she was, Lena, pressed into the corner with Maggie crushed against her chest, both of them trembling violently. Her dress was torn worse than before, a fresh bruise blooming on her cheekbone, but she was alive. They were both alive. "They came," she whispered, her voice hollow with shock. "Two of them, the young one and another. They kicked in the door before I could. I shot the first one when he grabbed for Maggie. The other one ran." Ethan lowered his rifle and crossed to them in 3 strides, dropping to his knees beside the shaking pair. "You're all right. You're both all right." He reached out, then stopped, unsure if touch would comfort or terrify. "Did they hurt you?" Lena shook her head, but the movement was too quick, too frantic. "He tried. The one I shot. He said Victor sent them to bring us back, that he didn't care if we came willing or not." Her eyes found the body by the door. "I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted him to let go of Maggie, and the gun went off and—" "Hey!" Ethan's voice cut through her rising panic. "You did what you had to do. You protected your daughter. That's all that matters." Maggie began to cry then, huge gulping sobs that shook her whole body. Lena gathered her close, murmuring soft reassurances, but her own eyes were wide with the aftershock of violence. Ethan stood and moved to the door, scanning the horizon. The second rider was gone, horse and all, which meant Victor would know what happened within the hour, would know his hired man was dead, would know Lena had fought back, would come with everyone he could muster. He turned back to find Lena watching him, understanding dawning in her tear-streaked face. "It's over, isn't it? Any chance of this ending peacefully?" Was never going to end peacefully. Ethan dragged the dead man outside by his boots, not wanting Maggie to see the body any longer. "But yeah, this changes things. We need to move. Now." "Where?" "The canyon I scouted. It's defensible, has water, enough cover to last out a siege if we have to." He began gathering supplies with swift efficiency, ammunition, food, blankets, the small medical kit from the shelf. "Can you ride?" "I can learn fast." "Learn. Good enough." He pulled his second horse from the corral, a sturdy mare with a gentle disposition, and began strapping supplies to both animals. "We've got maybe an hour before they come. Need to be gone before then." Lena stood still holding Maggie and looked around the cabin one last time, at the bed where her daughter's fever had broken, at the fire that had warmed them when they'd been freezing, at the threshold where a stranger had chosen to help instead of turn them away. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "about your home." Ethan paused, following her gaze. The cabin was just timber and nails, but it had been his refuge for 5 years, the place where he'd hidden from the world and nursed his grief in solitude. Leaving it felt like shedding a skin he'd worn too long. "It was never really a home," he said finally. "Just a place I was waiting to die." He looked at her then, at the woman who'd knocked on his door and reminded him what it meant to live for something beyond himself. "Maybe that's why you came, to wake me up before I disappeared completely." Their eyes held for a moment, and something passed between them, understanding, recognition, the beginning of trust built on shared danger and impossible choices. Then Maggie coughed, small and weak, and the moment broke. "Let's go," Ethan said. They rode out 15 minutes later, Lena on the mare with Maggie bundled in front of her, Ethan on the gelding leading the way. He set a hard pace, pushing the horses as fast as he dared with a child and inexperienced rider, angling northeast toward the canyon. Behind them, smoke from the cabin chimney marked their former refuge like a beacon. They were a mile out when Ethan heard it, distant hoofbeats, multiple riders, coming fast from the south. He didn't have to look back to know who it was. "Can you gallop?" he called to Lena. Her face had gone pale, but she nodded. "Tell me what to do." "Lean forward, keep your weight in the stirrups, hold tight to Maggie, and let the horse do the work." He kicked his gelding into a run. Stay close to me and don't look back. The canyon was still 2 miles ahead when the riders appeared on the ridge behind them, 6, maybe 7, dark shapes against the pale sky. Victor would be among them, Ethan knew, leading them, hungry for blood and vindication. The horses stretched into full gallops, hooves pounding the frozen earth, breath steaming in the cold air. Lena bent low over Maggie's small form, her face set with determination, trusting her life and her daughter's life to an animal she'd never ridden before. Gunfire cracked behind them, too far for accuracy, but close enough to make the point. They were being hunted now, prey running for ground they might not reach. The canyon entrance loomed ahead, a dark slash between walls of stone. Ethan guided them through at a reckless pace, the horses' hooves clattering on rock, then reined up hard in the protected space beyond. "Get down," he ordered, already dismounting. "Take Maggie to the back, behind those boulders. Stay low, and don't move until I tell you." Lena slid from the saddle, nearly falling, then staggered toward the rocks with Maggie clutching her neck. Ethan grabbed his rifle and took position at the canyon entrance, where the deadfall he'd arranged earlier now served its purpose. A barrier that would force the riders to dismount and come through on foot. He didn't have to wait long. Victor appeared first, riding hard, his face twisted with rage. He pulled up short when he saw the canyon mouth, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. The other riders formed up behind him, 6 men total, all armed, all wearing the hard expressions of men paid to do violence. "Ethan Cole!" Victor's voice rang off the canyon walls. "You've made this harder than it needed to be." Ethan said nothing, just sighted down his rifle barrel, waiting. "I'll make you a deal," Victor called. "Send out Lena and the girl, and we'll leave. No harm to you. You can walk away from this." "Can't do that." "Why?" Victor's voice climbed, frustration cracking through. "She's nothing to you, just some woman who showed up on your doorstep. Why throw your life away for her?" Ethan thought about that, about the real answer, which he didn't fully understand himself, about how a knock in the night had cracked open something he'd thought was sealed forever, about how Maggie's laugh sounded like his daughter's had, and how Lena's fierce love reminded him of what he'd lost. "Because she asked for help," he said finally, "and I still remember what it means to be human." Victor stared at him for a long moment, then spat on the ground. "So be it. Boys, he's in a hole with no way out. We've got supplies and numbers. We wait him out, take him when he's weak." He smiled, cold and certain. "And when he falls, I'm going to make Lena watch before I take her back." The words hit Ethan like physical blows, but he kept his expression neutral. "You're welcome to try." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Victor's men dismounted and began setting up a siege. They built a fire out of rifle range, passing whiskey and checking weapons. Patient, confident, 7 against 1, with time on their side. Inside the canyon, Ethan returned to where Lena huddled with Maggie behind the boulders. The child had fallen into exhausted sleep, her small face peaceful despite everything. Lena looked up at him with eyes that held too much knowledge of how this would end. "We're trapped," she said softly. "For now. He'll wait us out. We have maybe 2 days of food, 3 if we're careful. Then we figure something else out." Ethan settled beside them, his back against cold stone, rifle across his knees. "I've been in worse spots." "Name one." He smiled despite everything. "All right, maybe not worse, but close." The smile faded. "I'm sorry, I should have seen this coming faster, should have had us clear before they regrouped. You saved our lives twice over." Lena's hand found his arm, her touch light but deliberate. "Don't apologize for that." They sat in silence as darkness crept into the canyon, painting everything in shades of blue and black. Somewhere outside, Victor's men laughed around their fire, secure in their numerical advantage. Ethan stared up at the emerging stars and did the arithmetic. 7 men. Limited ammunition. No reinforcements coming. Against him, 1 rifle, 1 pistol, the element of surprise if he could manufacture it, and a will hardened by 5 years of grief and guilt. Not good odds, but not impossible either. "Lena," he said quietly, "I need you to do something for me." She turned, her face barely visible in the gathering dark. If this goes bad, if they get past me. He swallowed hard. There's a trail at the back of this canyon, hidden behind those rocks. It's narrow, barely wide enough for a horse, but it leads northeast to open country. You take Maggie, and you run. Don't look back. Don't wait for me. Ethan, promise me. His voice turned hard, urgent. I won't die easy, which means you'll have time. Use it. Get her somewhere safe, somewhere he can't find you. Lena's breath hitched. And leave you to die alone? After everything? I've been alone for 5 years. I'm used to it. He met her eyes. But you and Maggie, you deserve a life beyond running, beyond fear. If my dying gives you that, then it's a death worth having. She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a fierceness that surprised him. How about instead of planning noble sacrifices, we plan how to survive this together? Despite everything, he felt a smile tug at his mouth. You got any ideas? Actually, she said slowly, I might. And as she outlined her plan, desperate, dangerous, requiring perfect timing and more luck than either of them had any right to expect, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Hope, maybe. Or just the recognition that he wasn't in this fight alone anymore. Whatever happened when dawn came, they'd face it together. And that made all the difference. The plan was simple in the way that desperate things often are, built more on necessity than wisdom, requiring timing so precise that a single mistake would mean death for all of them. Lena spoke in whispers, her words coming fast and urgent in the darkness. Victor thinks he knows me, thinks I'm weak, helpless, someone who'll fold under pressure. Her jaw tightened. He spent 3 years breaking me down, making me believe that's who I am. But he's wrong. Ethan listened, his eyes adjusting to the shadows, watching her face transform as she spoke. This wasn't the terrified woman who'd knocked on his door. This was someone harder, forged by survival and sharpened by the need to protect her child. He'll want to talk to me, she continued. His ego won't let him just shoot his way in. He'll want me to see him win, want me to beg. She glanced toward the canyon entrance where Victor's campfire glowed like a malevolent eye. So we give him what he wants. I go out there. I surrender. Absolutely not. Ethan's voice came flat and final. Listen to me. She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in with surprising strength. I go out there, keep him talking, keep all their attention on me. While they're focused on the front, you circle around through that back trail you mentioned. Come at them from behind. Oh, Lena, if anything goes wrong, then I'll handle it. Her eyes blazed in the starlight. I killed one of his men today, Ethan. Shot him dead to protect my daughter. You think I can't face Victor one more time if it means giving you the advantage? He studied her face, seeing the determination there, the calculation. She'd thought this through, understood the risks and accepted them. But the idea of using her as bait, of putting her in Victor's hands even for a moment, made something violent twist in his gut. There has to be another way. There isn't, not with 7 of them and 1 of you, not with Maggie to protect. She softened slightly, her voice dropping. I'm not asking you to rescue me, Ethan. I'm asking you to trust me to do my part while you do yours. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Partnership. Equals sharing the weight of survival. It was so different from what he'd known before. The old dynamic of protector and protected, strong and weak. This was something else, something that required him to see her not as someone to save, but as someone capable of saving herself. All right, he said finally, the agreement tasting like copper on his tongue. But we do it at first light. Gives me time to get into position before you walk out there. Lena nodded, relief flickering across her features. First light. They spent the next hours in careful preparation. Ethan showed her the hidden trail at the canyon's back, barely visible even when you knew where to look. A crack in the stone that widened into a path a horse could navigate if the rider had nerve and the animal had sure footing. He made her memorize landmarks, count paces, understand exactly where it led. If shooting starts before I'm in position, you run, he said. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. Just take Maggie and go. Same goes for you. Her eyes met his in the darkness. If it falls apart, if I can't hold his attention long enough, you get out. Live to fight another day. They both knew neither of them would run, not really, but the lie was a comfort, a pretense that there were futures beyond the next few hours. Maggie woke sometime around midnight, confused and frightened by the cold and the dark, and the tension radiating from the adults. Lena held her close, humming songs that Ethan didn't recognize but that seemed to calm the child. He watched them from across the small space, mother and daughter wrapped together against the night, and felt the full weight of what hung in the balance. If this went wrong, Maggie would end up in Victor's hands, would grow up under the shadow of his violence, his possessiveness, his twisted view of ownership and love. The thought made Ethan's blood run cold. "Tell me about her," he said softly, needing to fill the silence with something other than fear. "About Maggie. What she's like when she's not running for her life." Lena's expression softened, transformed by a mother's love. "She's smart. Too smart for her own good sometimes. Asks questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Where do birds go in winter? Why can't people fly?" A sad smile touched her lips. Victor hated that about her, said little girls should be seen and not heard, tried to beat the curiosity out of her. But it didn't work. No. Pride crept into Lena's voice. She'd wait until he left, then ask me all her questions in whispers. We'd make up stories together about places we'd go someday, things we'd see. She wanted to visit the ocean, said she'd read about it in a book, and couldn't imagine that much water all in one place. Ethan felt something crack open inside him. His own daughter had been like that, full of wonder, full of questions he'd never gotten to answer. "When this is over," he heard himself say, "when you're safe, you should take her to see it. The ocean. Keep that promise." Lena looked at him, her eyes glistening. "We will. And maybe—" She stopped, swallowing the rest of the sentence, but Ethan heard it anyway in the space between words. "Maybe you'll come with us." He didn't respond, couldn't, because the future was a luxury neither of them could afford to count on. Instead, he moved to the canyon entrance and began his watch, rifle ready, counting the hours until dawn. The night crawled past in increments of cold and waiting. Victor's men took turns on guard, their shadows moving against the firelight. Ethan studied their patterns, memorizing who was quick and who was careless, who stayed alert and who let their attention drift. Every detail mattered. Every advantage, however small, might be the difference between living and dying. Around 3 in the morning, the temperature dropped sharply, frost forming on stone and steel. Ethan's breath came in white plumes. Behind him, he could hear Lena shifting, trying to keep Maggie warm with their single blanket and her own body heat. He wanted to give them his coat, his bedroll, anything to ease their discomfort, but he needed to stay mobile, stay ready. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant, offering no comfort. Finally, the eastern sky began to pale. Not true dawn yet, but the promise of it, the slow bleeding of darkness into gray. Ethan moved back to where Lena sat with Maggie still sleeping against her shoulder. "It's time," he said quietly. Lena nodded and gently transferred the child to the nest of blankets they'd arranged behind the boulders. Maggie murmured in her sleep, but didn't wake. For a moment, Lena just looked at her daughter, memorizing her face maybe, in case this was the last time. Then she straightened and met Ethan's eyes. "Give me 10 minutes to get their attention," she said. "Then come in hard and fast." "Lena." He stopped, unsure what he wanted to say. "Thank you" seemed inadequate. "Be careful" seemed pointless. In the end, he settled for simple truth. "You're braver than anyone I've ever known." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I'm terrified, but I'm also a mother. We do impossible things when our children need us to." She turned toward the canyon entrance before he could respond, her steps steady despite the fear he knew was screaming through her veins. Ethan watched her go, his chest tight, then forced himself to move. He had a job to do, a trail to navigate, a position to reach before the shooting started. He slipped through the crack in the stone at the canyon's back, leading his horse by the reins, moving as quietly as possible over rock and scree. The trail was worse than he'd remembered, narrow and treacherous, with drops on one side that fell away into darkness. One wrong step would send them both tumbling. But the horse trusted him, and he trusted the animal's instincts, and together they picked their way through the pre-dawn shadows while behind them, Lena walked into the lion's den. She emerged from the canyon entrance just as the sun broke over the eastern ridge. painting the world in shades of gold and crimson. Victor's men scrambled to their feet, hands moving to weapons, but she held her arms out to her sides, empty, unthreatening, surrendering. "Victor!" Her voice carried across the open ground, strong despite everything. "I want to talk!" There was a moment of shocked silence. Then Victor stepped forward, his face splitting into a smile that held no warmth, only triumph and malice. "Well now, finally showing some sense." Ethan heard this from his position halfway around the ridge, the sound carrying on the cold morning air. He moved faster, pushing the horse, racing against time and the terrible possibility that Lena's courage would run out before he reached the right position. "Let me take Maggie and go," Lena was saying, her voice steady even as she faced down 7 armed men. "You never wanted her anyway. She was just a way to control me. Let us walk away and you'll never see us again." Victor laughed, harsh and bitter. "You think you get to make demands? After what you've done? You killed one of my men, Lena, shot him dead. That's murder. He tried to take my daughter. I defended her. Any mother would have done the same. Any mother wouldn't have run in the first place." Victor moved closer, his hand resting on his pistol. "You belong to me. Maggie belongs to me. And that cowboy who thought he could play hero? He's going to watch while I remind you of that fact before I put a bullet in his head." Ethan reached the position he needed, high ground behind Victor's camp, with a clear line of sight on all 7 men. He dismounted silently, tied the horse to a scrub pine, and brought his rifle to his shoulder. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows, making it easy to see every detail of the scene below. Lena stood alone in the open ground between the canyon and Victor's camp, her chin raised, her body language defiant despite her surrender. She was buying him time, he realized, drawing this out, letting Victor's ego run wild, keeping every eye focused on her. "You're going to kill him anyway," she said, "whether I cooperate or not. So why should I make this easy for you? Because if you don't, I'll make you watch while I hurt that little girl." Victor's voice dropped to something cold and reptilian. "I'll make it slow, make it hurt, and you'll know it's your fault for not being a good, obedient woman." The threat hung in the air like poison. Ethan's finger moved to the trigger, his breathing slowing, his heart rate dropping into the calm that came before violence. He had one chance to get this right, one moment to turn the odds. "I'll cooperate," Lena said, and the defeat in her voice sounded so real that for a second Ethan almost believed it. "Just promise me you won't hurt her, please, Victor. She's your daughter. She's innocent in all this." Victor smiled, sensing victory. "That's better. Now here's what's going to—" Ethan's first shot took the guard on the left, the one who'd been watching Lena with too much interest. He dropped without a sound, dead before he hit the ground. The second shot came half a breath later, catching another man in the shoulder, spinning him around. Then chaos erupted. Victor's men scattered, diving for cover, trying to figure out where the shots were coming from. Ethan worked the rifle's action smoothly, each movement the product of years of practice, picking his targets with cold precision. Another man down. Another wounded. Lena didn't freeze or panic. The moment the first shot rang out, she was moving, sprinting back toward the canyon entrance with a speed born of pure adrenaline and mother's desperation. Victor roared in fury, firing wildly toward the canyon, not realizing the threat came from behind. "Get her! Don't let her reach the cowboy!" 2 of his men broke from cover, chasing after Lena. Ethan tracked the first one, led him just right, and dropped him 10 yards from the canyon mouth. The second one made it closer, raising his pistol toward Lena's back. Ethan's shot caught him in the chest, and he fell forward, weapon tumbling from lifeless fingers. That left 3 men, Victor and 2 others, now scrambling to reposition, finally understanding that the shots came from the ridge above and behind them. They returned fire, bullets whining off stone near Ethan's position, forcing him to duck behind cover. In that moment of distraction, Victor ran for the horses. Not toward the canyon to claim his prize, but away, abandoning his men, his revenge, everything except his own survival. Ethan watched him mount and kick the horse into a gallop, riding hard toward the south. The remaining 2 men saw their leader flee and made the same calculation. They broke and ran, mounting their own horses, following Victor's retreating form. Ethan could have shot them, had clean shots on both, but something made him hold his fire. Maybe it was mercy. Maybe it was the practical knowledge that wounded men would carry the story of what happened here, would spread word that Lena Hart and her daughter were under the protection of a man who shot straight and meant his threats. Or maybe he was just tired of killing. He lowered the rifle and watched them disappear into the distance, dust rising behind their horses' hooves. 4 men lay dead or dying in the open ground. 3 more rode for their lives, including Victor Hale. It was over. Ethan made his way down from the ridge, his legs shaking now that the adrenaline was fading, his hands trembling slightly as he reloaded the rifle out of habit. By the time he reached the canyon entrance, Lena was emerging with Maggie in her arms, the child awake now and crying softly against her mother's shoulder. Their eyes met across 20 feet of blood-stained ground. "He ran," Ethan said simply. They all did. Lena's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, still holding Maggie, her whole body shaking with relief and delayed shock. "Is it really over?" Ethan looked toward the horizon where Victor and his remaining men had disappeared. The smart thing would be to say yes, to let her believe the threat had passed, but he'd never been good at comforting lies. "For now," he said. "But Victor's the kind who'll nurse his grudge. He might come back someday, might not. Either way, he knows you're willing to kill to protect her. Knows I'm willing to die to protect you both. That might be enough to make him think twice. And if it's not?" He moved to her side, knelt down so they were eye level. "Then we deal with it when it comes. Together." The word felt natural this time, right? "But for today, you're safe. Maggie's safe. That's what matters." Maggie lifted her head from her mother's shoulder, her small face streaked with tears. "Mama, can we stay here? I like it here." The simple question broke something in both adults. Lena laughed through her tears, pressing kisses to her daughter's hair. Ethan felt his throat tighten with an emotion he'd thought died 5 years ago. "I don't know, sweetheart," Lena said softly, looking at Ethan. "That's not my decision to make." But Ethan was already nodding, the decision made somewhere in the night while he watched them sleep, or maybe the moment Lena had knocked on his door, or perhaps even earlier, in the 5 long years he'd spent alone, building walls around his heart that had only been waiting for the right people to tear them down. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. "The cabin's not much, but it's warm, safe, and there's room for a family, if you want it to be one." The word hung between them, family, not bound by blood or law, but by choice and shared survival, and the quiet understanding that they had all found something worth protecting in each other. Lena reached out and took his hand, her fingers cold but steady. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For opening your door. For standing when you could have run. For seeing us as worth fighting for." He squeezed her hand gently, unable to find words adequate to the moment. Instead, he stood and helped her to her feet, his other hand coming to rest briefly on Maggie's small back. Together they walked back toward the canyon where the horses waited, leaving behind the dead and the blood and the violence that had nearly destroyed them all. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the morning cold, promising warmth, if not certainty. Above them, a hawk circled on thermal currents, crying out in a voice that echoed off the stone. The sound was wild and free, and Ethan chose to hear it as a good sign, as a new beginning. They had survived the night, survived Victor and his men, survived the desperate gamble that could have ended with all of them dead. Now came the harder part, learning to live again. Learning to trust the fragile thing growing between them. Learning to be a family forged not in the comfortable progression of courtship and vows, but in blood and fear and the fierce determination to protect what mattered. As they rode back toward the cabin, Maggie fell asleep again against her mother's chest, exhausted by fear and tears. Lena rode with more confidence now, her body learning the rhythm of the horse, adapting to this new life that was nothing like what she'd planned, but perhaps exactly what she needed. And Ethan rode beside them, no longer alone, no longer dead inside, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a familiar coat. It was heavy, yes, but it was also purpose. Direction. A reason to wake up tomorrow and the day after that. The cabin came into view as they crested the final rise, small and rough and imperfect, smoke still drifting from the chimney where the fire had burned all night. It looked different now, or maybe Ethan was the one who'd changed. Either way, it no longer felt like a tomb where he waited to join his dead family. It felt like a home waiting to be filled with new life. They dismounted in front of the porch, and Lena carried Maggie inside while Ethan tended the horses. By the time he entered, she'd laid the child on the bed and was stoking the fire, her movements careful, as if she feared disturbing the fragile peace that had settled over them all. "I'll need to bury the bodies," Ethan said quietly, "before they draw scavengers." Lena nodded. "I'll help. After Maggie wakes up and eats something." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "What happens now, Ethan? Really? Not the polite fiction we tell ourselves, but the truth." He considered the question, all its implications and complications. "The truth is, I don't know. I haven't thought past keeping you both alive." He moved to the window, looking out at the land he'd claimed 5 years ago. "But I suppose we figure it out the same way anyone does. One day at a time. One decision at a time. And if Victor comes back, if he brings the law, claims I kidnapped his daughter, that you're harboring a criminal, then we deal with it." His voice hardened. "I know the territorial marshal. Good man, fair man. He'll listen to your story, see those bruises, understand what you were running from." He turned back to her. "And if the law won't protect you, then I will, whatever it takes." Something shifted in Lena's expression. Gratitude, yes, but also recognition. She saw him clearly now, understood the depths of his commitment, and instead of being frightened by it, she seemed to draw strength from it. "I can work," she said, "earn my keep. I'm good with sewing, cooking, managing a household. I won't be a burden." "You're not a burden, Lena. Neither of you." He crossed to where she stood, his voice gentle but firm. "You're family now. That means we take care of each other, share the work and the worry." He paused, searching for the right words. "I won't lie and say this will be easy. Winter's coming hard, and we're isolated out here. Maggie will need schooling eventually, proper medicine, things I can't provide on my own. And there's the question of Victor, whether he'll accept defeat or come back looking for revenge." "I know." She met his eyes steadily. "But I'd rather face all of that here, with you, than spend another day under his control. At least here, Maggie has a chance to grow up free, to be herself without fear." Her voice caught. "That's worth any hardship." Maggie stirred on the bed, making small, sleepy sounds. Both adults turned toward her, drawn by the simple magic of a child waking peacefully instead of in terror. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, then looked around the cabin with the dawning awareness of someone remembering where they were. "Mama?" Her voice came small and uncertain. "Are the bad men gone?" Lena crossed to the bed and gathered her daughter into her arms. "Yes, baby, they're gone. We're safe now." "Because of Mr. Ethan?" "Because of Mr. Ethan," Lena confirmed, looking over Maggie's head to meet his eyes. "He kept us safe." Maggie wiggled free from her mother's embrace and walked over to where Ethan stood by the window. She looked up at him with those serious dark eyes, so much older than her 4 years should allow, and said simply, "Thank you for not letting them take us." Ethan knelt down so they were eye level, his throat tight with emotion. "You're welcome, little one." He hesitated, then added, "You're both welcome to stay here as long as you want. It's not much, but it's yours if you need it." "Can I see the horses?" Maggie asked with the lightning-quick subject change of childhood. "Mama says we rode them, but I was too scared to look." Despite everything, Ethan smiled. "Sure. Let's get you fed first, then I'll introduce you properly." As Lena prepared a simple breakfast of oatmeal and dried apples, Ethan watched the two of them move around his cabin with growing ease. Maggie asked 100 questions about everything she saw. Why did he have so many tools? Where did the water come from? What were those marks on the wall? And her endless curiosity filled the space with life in a way it hadn't known for years. This was what he'd lost, he realized. Not just his wife and daughter specifically, but this. The noise and warmth and beautiful chaos of family. The sense of purpose that came from caring for others. The way a child's laugh could make even the hardest day feel bearable. After breakfast, true to his word, he took Maggie outside to meet the horses. She was nervous at first, hiding behind his legs, but gradually her natural curiosity won out. By the time the sun reached its zenith, she was feeding the gray gelding handfuls of dried grass and telling him all about her journey, as if the horse understood every word. Lena stood on the porch watching them, and when Ethan caught her eye, she smiled, tentative but real, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, made him see past the exhaustion and fear to the person she might become once safety became familiar instead of foreign. The afternoon passed in quiet industry. Ethan buried the bodies while Lena cleaned the cabin, scrubbing away the bloodstains and restoring order. It was grim work for both of them, a reminder of how close they'd come to disaster, but necessary. You couldn't move forward while standing in the wreckage of violence. By evening, the worst of it was done. They sat together around the fire, Maggie already asleep in the bed, her small chest rising and falling with the deep, easy breathing of childhood. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the promise of the winter that was bearing down on them. "Tell me about them," Lena said softly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Your wife and daughter, if you want to, I mean." Ethan stared into the flames, the request catching him off guard. For 5 years, he'd avoided speaking their names, as if silence could somehow preserve them in amber, untouched by time or the corruption of memory. But now, with Lena beside him and Maggie sleeping peacefully nearby, the old prohibition felt less like protection and more like cowardice. "Her name was Sarah," he began, his voice rough from disuse on this particular subject. "My wife. We met at a church social in Kansas before I came out here. She had red hair and laughed too loud and didn't care what anybody thought about her." A faint smile touched his lips at the memory. "I was 22 and thought I knew everything. She was 19 and actually did know most things that mattered." Lena listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. "Our daughter was Emma. She'd have been 9 now, if—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "She looked like her mother. Same red hair, same stubbornness, always getting into things, asking questions, making up songs about whatever crossed her mind." His voice cracked slightly. "The last time I saw her, she was crying because I was leaving for the cattle drive. Made me promise I'd bring her back something special from Montana." "What were you going to bring her?" "A spotted pony I'd seen at a ranch we passed through. Cost me 2 months' wages, but I bought it anyway, thinking about how her face would light up when she saw it." He rubbed his hand over his face, the grief still sharp after all these years. "Got word about the cholera outbreak while I was still 300 miles away. By the time I made it home, they'd been in the ground for 10 days. The cabin fell silent except for the crackle of burning wood. Outside, an owl called, lonely and distant. The pony lived another year," Ethan continued. "I kept it, rode it sometimes, but mostly just let it graze. Couldn't bring myself to sell it or give it away. Then one morning I woke up and it had died during the night. Old age maybe, or just meanness of fate. I buried it next to their graves and came out here." He looked at Lena then, his eyes reflecting firelight and old pain. "Figured if I was far enough from everything, the grief couldn't follow. But it did. Turns out you can't outrun yourself." Lena reached over and took his hand, her fingers warm despite the cold cup she'd been holding. "Thank you for telling me, for trusting me with that. Seems only fair. You trusted me with your life, your daughter's life. That's worth more than stories about the dead." He squeezed her hand gently. "Besides, it feels different now, talking about them. Like maybe I can remember without drowning in it." "That's what healing looks like, I think," Lena said. "Not forgetting, but learning to carry it without it crushing you." She paused, then added quietly, "I hope someday Maggie can talk about these years without flinching, can remember her childhood as more than just running and fear." "She will. You'll make sure of it." Ethan stood, releasing her hand with reluctance, and moved to check the fire. "And she'll remember this too, how her mother fought like hell to save her, how she was brave enough to shoot a man, to surrender herself as bait, to keep going when most people would have given up. That's worth remembering." Lena's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I was terrified every second. Courage isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing what needs doing anyway." He settled back into his chair, his gaze distant. "Sarah used to say that, usually right before she did something that scared me half to death, like breaking a wild horse or climbing on the roof to fix shingles." A comfortable quiet descended again, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The wind outside grew stronger, rattling the shutters, reminding them that winter was coming, and with it, a whole new set of challenges. They'd survived Victor and his men, but nature was an enemy that couldn't be shot or reasoned with. "We need to talk about practical things." Ethan said eventually. Winter supplies, firewood, getting Maggie some proper clothes and shoes before the snow comes. He looked at Lena seriously. I've got enough put by to see us through, but it'll be tight. And come spring, we'll need to figure out something more permanent. I can help with that. I'm good with a needle, like I said. Could take in mending from town, maybe make quilts to sell. Lena's mind was already working, planning, refusing to be a burden. And Maggie's quick with her hands. I've been teaching her simple stitches. Nothing fancy yet, but she could help. There's also the question of schooling. Town's got a one-room schoolhouse, but it's 15 miles each way. Too far for a child to walk, especially in winter. I can teach her, Lena offered. I had schooling through 8th grade, can read and write well enough. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. Ethan nodded slowly, pieces of a plan forming. All right, then here's what I'm thinking. We spend the winter here, quiet-like, building up reserves and getting Maggie strong. Come spring, I ride into town, file proper claim on this land, make it legal and recorded, maybe put word around that I've got family staying with me, just so nobody gets the wrong idea. Will people ask questions about where we came from, who we are? Probably. Frontier's got long memory for gossip, but short interest in other people's business, especially if those people mind their own. He met her eyes. We tell the truth, mostly. You're a widow with a child, needed help. I provided it. Nobody needs to know about Victor unless he makes it their business. And if he does? If he comes back with the law, claims I stole his daughter? Ethan's expression hardened. Then we deal with it head on. Get you a lawyer if we need one. Tell your story to a judge. Show the bruises that haven't quite faded. His voice dropped, dangerous and certain. And if the law won't protect you, well, this is still wild country. Men disappear out here all the time. Nobody asks too many questions. The implicit threat hung in the air, that he would kill Victor before letting him take Lena and Maggie back. It should have frightened her, this quiet acknowledgement of how far he was willing to go. Instead, she felt safer than she had in 3 years. I don't want you to become a murderer for us, she said softly. Already killed 4 men to keep you safe. What's one more if it means a child grows up free? He stood and moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. I'm not a good man, Lena. Haven't been for a long time. But I'm trying to be a better one. And if that means standing between you and the monsters, then that's what I'll do. Lena rose and crossed to stand beside him, their reflections ghostly in the dark glass. You are a good man, Ethan Cole. A good man who lost his way for a while. But you're finding it again. She touched his arm lightly. We both are. They stood there together, neither quite willing to name what was growing between them, fragile and new as spring grass pushing through winter snow. It was too soon, too raw, built on too much trauma to be trusted. But it was there nonetheless, a connection forged in crisis that might, given time and care, become something more. The next week settled into a rhythm as natural as breathing. Ethan rose before dawn to tend the animals and chop wood, the physical labor a meditation that cleared his mind. Lena cooked and cleaned and mended, transforming the bachelor cabin into something that felt like a home. And Maggie, her health fully restored, filled the space with questions and laughter and the particular chaos that only a 4-year-old could create. She followed Ethan everywhere, a small shadow with tangled dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. He found himself explaining things he'd never thought to explain. Why horses needed shoes, how to read the sky for weather, the difference between the tracks of a wolf and a dog. She absorbed everything with fierce concentration, her mind hungry for knowledge the way her body had been hungry for food. Why don't you have a wife? She asked one afternoon while they were mucking out the stalls, her bluntness as sharp as any blade. Ethan paused, leaning on his shovel. I did once. She died. That's sad. Maggie considered this with a child's gravity. My papa isn't dead, but Mama says we can't go back to him ever. He was mean. I know, little one. Are you mean? The question came innocent, curious, without accusation. I try not to be. He resumed working, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. But sometimes I probably am without meaning to. When that happens, you tell me, all right? Tell me so I can do better. She nodded, satisfied with this answer, and returned to her own small task of gathering scattered hay. A few moments passed in companionable silence before she spoke again. I like it here. I like you. The simple declaration hit him square in the chest, unexpected and devastating in its honesty. I like you too, Maggie. Are you going to marry my mama? He nearly dropped the shovel. That's not, we haven't, she smiles now. She didn't smile before. Only when she thought I wasn't looking, and then it was sad smiles. Maggie looked up at him with eyes too knowing for her age. Now they're real smiles. Happy ones. I think it's because of you. Ethan had no response to that, no words adequate to the strange mixture of hope and terror her observation provoked. Instead, he just nodded and changed the subject to safer ground. Horses and weather, and anything that didn't require him to examine the growing attachment between himself and the woman who'd knocked on his door. But Maggie's words stayed with him, echoing through the evenings when he and Lena sat by the fire after the child was asleep, talking about nothing and everything. He noticed things he'd been trying not to notice. The way lamplight caught in her hair, the sound of her laugh when something genuinely amused her, the competent grace of her hands as she worked. And he noticed her noticing him. Quick glances when she thought he wasn't looking, the way she angled herself toward him in conversation, the small touches that lasted just a heartbeat longer than necessary. They were circling something, both aware of it, neither quite brave enough to name it. November deepened into December, and with it came the first serious snow. Ethan woke one morning to find the world transformed, white and silent and impossibly beautiful. He stood at the window watching fat flakes drift down from a gray sky, and heard Maggie's delighted shriek behind him. She'd never seen snow before, had spent her whole short life in the warmer territories to the south. Now she pressed her face to the window, her breath fogging the glass, her excitement palpable. "Can I go out in it?" "Please, Mama, please." Lena laughed, the sound free and unguarded in a way Ethan was learning to treasure. After breakfast, and only if you're bundled up warm. They spent the morning in the snow, Maggie learning to make angels and throw snowballs, her laughter ringing across the frozen landscape. Ethan showed her how to track rabbit prints, how to tell fresh snow from old. Lena watched from the porch, wrapped in a borrowed coat, her smile constant and genuine. Later, after Maggie had been coaxed inside and warmed with hot cocoa, Ethan found himself alone with Lena while the child napped. They worked together in easy silence, he carving new hinges for the barn door while she mended a tear in his winter coat. "She's happy here," Lena said eventually. "Really happy. I haven't seen her like this since—" She stopped, swallowing. "Since before Victor, really. Before I understood what kind of man he was." "What made you understand?" Ethan asked, then immediately regretted it. "Sorry, that's not my business." "No, it's all right." She set down her needle, her expression distant. It was little things at first. The way he'd grip my arm too tight when he was angry. How he always needed to know where I was, who I'd talk to. I told myself it was because he cared, because he loved me. Her voice turned bitter. "Love. I didn't know what the word meant." "And then?" "Then Maggie was born, and he got worse. Jealous of the attention I gave her. Started drinking more, staying out late, coming home mean." She picked up the needle again, her hands needing something to do. The first time he hit me, he cried after, swore it would never happen again. And like a fool, I believed him. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, letting her speak. It happened again, and again. Each time with more apologies, more promises, until the apologies stopped and it was just expected, just part of life. She met his eyes. "I stayed because I had nowhere to go, no money of my own, and I was terrified of what he'd do if I ran. And I might have stayed forever if I hadn't heard him talking about Maggie that night." "The night you left." "The night I left," she confirmed. Something broke in me when I heard the way he said her name, the way he looked at her. She was 4 years old and already he was— Her voice cracked. I knew if I didn't get her out, she'd grow up to be me, broken, afraid, thinking that's what love looks like. Ethan set down his tools and moved to sit beside her, close but not touching. "That's not love. Never was. Love is what you did, walking miles in the dark with a sick child because keeping her safe mattered more than your own comfort. Love is standing in front of 7 armed men and offering yourself up to buy time for escape." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Love is what you show her every day. Patience and protection and teaching her she's worth more than fear. Lena wiped at her eyes with the heel of her hand. Is that what you had? With Sarah? Mostly. We fought sometimes, disagreed on things, but yeah, underneath it all, that's what it was. Partnership, respect, wanting the best for each other even when it was hard. He smiled sadly. I didn't appreciate it enough while I had it. Thought we had all the time in the world. And now? The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Ethan looked at this woman who'd stumbled into his life and turned it upside down, who'd reminded him what it meant to care about something beyond his own grief. He thought about Maggie's innocent question in the barn, about the way his cabin felt like a home again, about the dangerous hope building in his chest. Now I know better than to waste time, he said quietly. Life's too short and too uncertain to spend it alone when you don't have to be. Lena's breath caught. Ethan. A knock at the door froze them both. Not the soft, desperate knock that Lena had used that first night. This was authoritative, official, demanding attention. Ethan's hand moved to his rifle before conscious thought, his body already positioning itself between the door and the women. Stay here, he murmured to Lena, then called out, Who's there? Marshal Tom Brennan, Territorial Law. Need to have a word with you, Cole. Ethan's stomach dropped. This was what they'd feared, what they'd been waiting for. Victor had gone to the law, spun some story, and now the reckoning had come. He glanced back at Lena, saw the terror in her eyes, and felt something harden in his chest. They'd survived too much to lose now. He wouldn't let them take her, wouldn't let them take Maggie. Give me a minute, he called, then turned to Lena. Wake Maggie. Get her dressed. If this goes bad, you take her and run for that canyon like we planned. Ethan, I won't leave you to... Promise me. His voice came hard, urgent. Promise me you'll save her no matter what. After a long moment, she nodded, tears streaming down her face. Ethan took a deep breath, checked his rifle was loaded, and opened the door. Marshal Tom Brennan stood on the porch. A tall man in his 50s with gray threading through his dark beard and eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. He wore a heavy coat against the cold and a badge that caught the weak winter sunlight. Behind him sat 2 deputies on horseback, both armed, both watchful. Marshal, Ethan said evenly, what brings you out this way in weather like this? Brennan's expression was neutral, professional. Got a complaint filed in town 3 weeks back. Man named Victor Hale claims you're harboring his common-law wife and daughter. Says you killed 4 of his men when he tried to retrieve his family. He paused, studying Ethan's face. That true? Ethan held his gaze. Parts of it. Which parts? I'm sheltering a woman and child who came to my door seeking help. And yes, I killed 4 men who tried to take them by force. His voice stayed level, factual. What Victor Hale didn't mention is that the woman was running for her life from his abuse, that she has bruises to prove it, that he threatened to hurt the child if she didn't surrender. Brennan's eyes flickered, but his expression didn't change. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth, and I can prove it if you'll talk to her yourself. Let her show you what he did, tell you why she ran. Ethan shifted his weight, ready for whatever came next. But I won't hand her over without that conversation. Won't send her back to a man who treats family like property. For a long moment, the marshal said nothing, just studied Ethan with those weathered, knowing eyes. Then he sighed, his breath steaming in the cold air. Mind if I come in? Have that conversation? Just me? Not my boys? It wasn't what Ethan had expected. He'd braced for arrest, for violence, for the need to fight his way out. This measured reasonableness threw him off balance. All right, he said slowly, stepping back. But know this. If you try to take them, I'll die before I let you. Noted. Brennan stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. His eyes swept the cabin, taking in the domestic scene, the fire burning warm, the smell of bread baking, the child's small shoes drying near the hearth. Mrs. Hale? I'm Marshal Brennan. I'd like to ask you some questions if you're willing. Helena emerged from behind the stove where she'd been hiding with Maggie. Her chin came up, defiant despite her fear. I'm willing. And it's Miss Hart, not Mrs. Hale. We were never legally married. Fair enough? Brennan settled into the chair Ethan offered, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. Why don't you tell me your side of things? Start from the beginning. So she did. Told him about meeting Victor, about the slow escalation of control and violence, about the threats to Maggie that had finally driven her to run. She showed him the fading bruises on her arms, the scar on her ribs from where Victor had kicked her 6 months ago. Told him about the night she'd overheard Victor and his brother about the decision to walk away from everything she knew to save her daughter. Brennan listened without interrupting, his face giving nothing away. When she finished, he sat silent for a long moment, then turned to Ethan. And your part in this? She knocked on my door after midnight with a sick child. I let them in, fed them, kept them warm. When Victor and his men showed up demanding I hand them over, I refused. They came back with more men, tried to take them by force. Ethan's voice hardened. I protected my family, that's all. Your family, Brennan repeated, something shifting in his expression. That's how you see them? Yes. Another long silence. Then Brennan stood, moved to the window, stared out at the falling snow. Victor Hale's got friends in town, men with money and influence. They're pushing hard for me to bring you all in, charge you with murder and kidnapping. Lena made a small sound of distress. Ethan's hand moved to his rifle. But, Brennan continued, turning back, I've been doing this job for 20 years, long enough to know when a man's lying and when he's not, long enough to recognize the signs of abuse on a woman's body. He looked at Lena with something like compassion, and long enough to know that sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing. Hope flickered dangerously in Ethan's chest. What are you saying, Marshal? I'm saying that as far as I'm concerned, I rode all the way out here in a snowstorm and found nothing. No woman, no child, no evidence of any wrongdoing. He met Ethan's eyes. But I'm also saying you need to make this official. File proper claim on this land, get it recorded in the territorial office. And Miss Hart here needs to file a complaint against Victor Hale for assault and battery. Create a legal record of what he did. He'll deny it, Lena said. Probably, but it'll be on the books. And if he comes after you again, we'll have grounds to arrest him for harassment. Brennan moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. You might want to consider getting married. Legal marriage gives you protections under law. Makes it harder for Victor to claim any parental rights. The suggestion hung in the air like snow waiting to fall. After Marshal Brennan left, the cabin fell into a silence so complete that even Maggie seemed to sense the weight of it. She sat on the bed, watching the adults with wide, uncertain eyes, her small hands twisting in her skirt. Ethan stood at the window, watching the marshal and his deputies disappear into the white landscape, their tracks already filling with fresh snow. His mind was churning through possibilities, calculating risks, trying to see all the angles of what came next. Marriage. The word echoed in his head like a bell, not a suggestion born of romance or courtship, but of legal necessity. A shield against Victor's claims, protection for Lena and Maggie in a world where the law still favored men, where a father's rights, even a brutal father's rights, often trumped a mother's desperation to save her child. He's right, you know, Lena said quietly, breaking the silence. About the marriage. It would give us legal standing that we don't have now. Ethan turned to face her. Marriage should be about more than legal protection. Should be. But sometimes practical matters more than should. She met his eyes, her expression a mixture of hope and resignation. I won't trap you into something you don't want, Ethan. You've already given us more than anyone had a right to expect. If you'd rather we find another solution, there is no other solution. He crossed a stand before her, his voice low and intense. Victor won't stop. The marshal's sympathy only goes so far, and money talks louder than justice in most courtrooms. If we want to keep Maggie safe, if we want to build something real here, instead of just waiting for the next threat, then we need to make it legal, she finished. Make it real in the eyes of the law, even if... She stopped, looking away. Even if it's not real between us. The words stung more than Ethan wanted to admit, because somewhere in the past weeks, between the violence and the domesticity, the fear and the quiet moments by the fire, it had started to become real. He'd started to care for this woman not just as someone who needed protecting, but as someone whose smile made his day brighter, whose strength reminded him of what real courage looked like. But saying that now, with the specter of legal necessity hanging over them, felt like it would cheapen something that should be sacred. "We should think on it," he said finally. "Not decide in haste just because a marshal said it made sense." Lena nodded, but something in her eyes dimmed, and Ethan wondered if he'd just hurt her by not immediately agreeing. The emotional calculus of this moment was beyond him, tangled up with grief and guilt and feelings he wasn't ready to name. Maggie broke the tension by climbing down from the bed and walking over to tug on Ethan's sleeve. "Are you and Mama going to get married like in the stories? Leave it to a child to cut straight to the heart of things." "Maybe, little one," Ethan said, kneeling down to her level. "Would that be all right with you?" She considered this with the gravity of a judge. "Will you be my papa then?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He'd been a father once, held that title with pride and joy, then lost it in the cruelest way possible. The thought of claiming it again, of stepping into that role for this small, fierce child who'd already known too much pain, it terrified and tempted him in equal measure. "If you wanted me to be," he heard himself say, "I'd try my best to be a good one." Maggie threw her arms around his neck with the unself-conscious affection of childhood. "I'd like that. You're nicer than my old papa. You don't yell or hit or make Mama cry." Over Maggie's shoulder, Ethan saw Lena cover her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of sadness, he realized. They were relief and gratitude and something deeper, more complicated. That evening, after Maggie had been fed and tucked into bed with a story about brave princesses and kind woodsmen, Ethan and Lena sat by the fire nursing cups of coffee and the conversation they'd been avoiding. "I know this isn't how you imagined your life," Lena began, "taking in strays, raising another man's child, getting married for legal protection instead of love." "Sarah used to say that life never goes the way you imagine," Ethan replied. "Said the trick was learning to love the life you got instead of mourning the one you planned." He stared into his cup, watching the dark liquid reflect firelight. "I imagined growing old with her, watching Emma grow up, maybe having more children, building something that would outlast us both. And instead, you're here with us." "Instead, I'm here with you," he agreed. "And you know what? I don't hate it. These past weeks, they've been the first time in 5 years I've woken up with a reason beyond just not dying. Having Maggie ask her endless questions, watching you turn this place into a home, even the terror of fighting off Victor's men, it made me feel alive again." Lena set down her cup and turned to face him fully. "I need to know something, and I need you to be honest. Are you doing this, any of this, out of obligation? Guilt? Some need to make up for not saving your own family?" The directness of the question startled him into truth. "Maybe at first. That night you knocked, some part of me saw Sarah and Emma, saw a chance to get it right this time." He met her eyes. "But that's not what this is anymore. You're not Sarah. Maggie's not Emma. And what I feel when I look at you—" He stopped, struggling with words that had gone unused for too long. "It's not about replacing what I lost. It's about finding something new. Something I didn't know I needed until it was standing in my cabin, refusing to be broken." "What do you feel?" Her voice came barely above a whisper. Ethan reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers rough against her work-worn skin. "I feel like I've been living underwater for 5 years, and you reminded me how to breathe. I feel like this cabin was a tomb and you filled it with life. I feel—" He squeezed her hand gently. "I feel like if I lost you and Maggie now, it would break something in me that even Sarah's death didn't break." Lena's breath caught. "Ethan, I know it's too soon. I know we've only known each other a few weeks. I know this should take time and courtship and all the proper steps." His voice roughened with emotion. "But nothing about this has been proper from the start. You came to my door in the middle of the night. I killed men to keep you safe. We've built something in the space between terror and hope that doesn't fit any normal pattern. So what are you saying?" "I'm saying yes, to the marriage, but not just for legal protection." He brought her hand to his lips, pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I'm saying yes because I want this. Want you. Want to be the man Maggie calls Papa, and the man you turn to when the nightmares come. Want to build the life we both lost, together this time." Lena made a sound between a laugh and a sob, then leaned forward and kissed him. It was brief and chaste, flavored with coffee and salt from her tears, but it carried the weight of promise and possibility. When they pulled apart, both were smiling despite the tears on Lena's cheeks. "Yes, then," she said, "yes to all of it." They married 3 weeks later, on a cold January morning when the sun broke through the clouds like a benediction. Marshal Brennan performed the ceremony in his office, with his wife serving as witness and Maggie holding a bouquet of dried wildflowers she'd insisted were absolutely necessary for a proper wedding. Ethan wore his cleanest shirt and had trimmed his beard for the occasion. Lena wore a simple dress she'd sewn from fabric Ethan had bought in town, dark blue wool that brought out the color in her eyes. There were no flowers beyond Maggie's bouquet, no music, no guests beyond the marshal and his wife. But when Ethan spoke his vows, to protect and cherish, to honor and stand beside her in good times and bad, he meant every word with an intensity that surprised him. And when Lena promised the same, her voice steady despite the tears, he knew she meant it too. Maggie stood between them throughout, one small hand in each of theirs, literally binding them together. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Brennan said, his voice carrying the weight of law and blessing. "Cole, you may kiss your bride." Ethan did, tenderly and thoroughly, while Maggie giggled and the marshal's wife dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Afterward, they filed the marriage certificate at the territorial office, along with Ethan's land claim and Lena's formal complaint against Victor Hale. The clerk, a pinch-faced man with ink-stained fingers, looked skeptical when he read the complaint's details, but the marshal's presence ensured he recorded everything without comment. "There," Brennan said as they left the office. "Now you're legal in every way that matters. Victor wants to make trouble. He'll have to go through proper channels. And given what's on record now, I doubt any judge would side with him." "What if he doesn't go through proper channels?" Ethan asked. "What if he just comes with more men, tries to take them by force again?" Brennan's expression hardened. "Then you defend your family same as any man would. Law says a husband has the right to protect his wife and child from harm. You kill Victor Hale while defending your home. That's justifiable under territorial law." He clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "But my advice? Keep your powder dry and your eyes open. Men like Hale don't forgive being made to look foolish." They rode back to the cabin through snow that had started falling again, Maggie bundled between Ethan and Lena on the horse, chattering about the wedding and asking if she could call Ethan Papa now, or if she should wait. "You can call me whatever feels right, little one," Ethan said. She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Papa then, if that's all right." Ethan had to blink back tears. "That's more than all right. That's perfect." The cabin welcomed them back like an old friend, smoke rising from the chimney where Ethan had banked the fire before they left. Inside, everything was exactly as they'd left it, yet somehow different. This was their home now, legally and truly. Not just shelter from a storm, but the foundation of something permanent. That night, after Maggie was asleep, Ethan and Lena sat together on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching stars emerge between snow clouds. The temperature was dropping fast, winter asserting its dominance, but huddled together, they were warm enough. "Are you scared?" Lena asked. "About what comes next?" "Terrified," Ethan admitted. "I'm responsible for you both now. If I fail, if I'm not there when you need me, then we'll face it together. That's what partnership means, right? Neither of us carrying the weight alone." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Besides, I'm terrified too. Being a wife again after Victor, it's hard not to flinch at shadows." "I'm not him." Ethan's voice came gentle but firm. "I'll never raise a hand to you or Maggie. Never use my strength to frighten or control. That's a promise, Lena. If I ever break it, you take that rifle and you put me down like a rabid dog." She pulled back to look at him, searching his face. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded and settled back against his shoulder. "I believe you. I wouldn't have married you otherwise." They sat in companionable silence, watching the snow fall until the cold finally drove them inside. The cabin was warm and welcoming, and for the first time in 5 years, Ethan didn't feel the ghost of his dead family haunting the corners. There was only the present, Lena moving about preparing for bed, Maggie's soft breathing from where she slept, the future spreading out before them uncertain but possible. Winter deepened its grip over the following weeks, bringing blizzards that buried the cabin to the windowsills and temperatures cold enough to freeze water in its bucket overnight. But inside, life took on a rhythm that felt almost normal. Ethan hunted when weather allowed, bringing back deer and rabbit to supplement their stores. Lena cooked and sewed and taught Maggie her letters, transforming the child from frightened and withdrawn to curious and confident. And slowly, carefully, Ethan and Lena learned each other. The marriage had been practical necessity, but they were determined to make it real. They talked late into the nights, sharing stories of their lives before, their hopes for the future, their fears and doubts. They learned each other's habits and preferences, the small domestic details that made two people into a partnership. There were awkward moments, of course, times when old grief or old trauma rose up unexpectedly. Nights when Lena woke gasping from nightmares of Victor finding them, when only Ethan's solid presence and whispered reassurances could calm her. Days when Ethan saw something that reminded him of Sarah and Emma and had to walk away until the wave of loss passed. But there were good moments too. Many of them. The first time Maggie successfully read a simple sentence and looked up at them with shining pride. The evening Lena laughed so hard at one of Ethan's stories that she had to hold her sides. The morning Ethan woke to find both his girls curled against him for warmth, trusting him completely. Spring came tentatively in late March, melting snow revealing the brown earth beneath. With it came a visitor. Ethan was in the barn when he heard horses approaching. His hand went to his rifle before he recognized the rider, Marshal Brennan, alone this time, his expression grim. "Marshal," Ethan called, stepping out to meet him. "Didn't expect to see you until summer, at least." Brennan dismounted, his movements showing the weariness of a long ride. "Wish I was coming for a social call, Cole. But we've got a problem." Ethan's stomach dropped. Victor. Dead. The word hung in the air, sharp and final. Ethan processed it, trying to understand. How? Shot during a card game in Denver 2 weeks back. Accused another player of cheating, pulled a gun, got himself killed for his trouble. Brennan pulled off his gloves, blowing on his cold hands. Normally, I wouldn't ride all this way to deliver news of some fool's death. But there's complications. What kind of complications? The kind where his brother filed a claim contesting your marriage to Lena. Says it was performed under false pretenses, that Victor never formally released his claim on her, that Maggie's still legally Victor's daughter and should go to family. Brennan's expression was apologetic. There's going to be a hearing. Judge wants to talk to everyone involved, make a determination about custody, and the marriage's validity. Ethan felt cold fury settle over him. When? 2 weeks. Territorial courthouse in Cheyenne. Brennan met his eyes. I know it's not fair, Cole, but the law requires it. You don't show up. The judge rules in the brothers' favor by default. Inside the cabin, Lena had heard the conversation through the open window. She appeared in the doorway, Maggie clutching her skirts, both of them pale. They want to take her, Lena said, her voice hollow. Even with Victor dead, they want to take her. Nobody's taking anybody, Ethan said with more confidence than he felt. We'll go to this hearing. We'll tell the truth. The judge will see what Victor's family wants him to see. Lena cut him off, desperation creeping into her voice. They have money, influence, respectability. We're just frontier squatters with a marriage of convenience and a story about abuse that we can't prove anymore because Victor's dead. You can prove it, Brennan spoke up. You've got the scars, the formal complaint on file, my testimony about the condition you were in when Cole first brought you to town. That counts for something. Against a wealthy family claiming they want to care for their deceased brother's only child? Lena's laugh was bitter. I've seen how these things go, Marshal. The law favors blood and money, not love and protection. Maggie started to cry, sensing the adult's fear without fully understanding it. Lena scooped her up automatically, murmuring reassurances that rang hollow even to Ethan's ears. After Brennan left with promises to testify on their behalf, Ethan and Lena sat in stunned silence. The security they'd built over the winter, the fragile hope that they could make a real life together, suddenly felt as insubstantial as morning fog. We could run, Lena said eventually. Take Maggie and disappear. Canada, maybe, or California? somewhere they'd never find us. And spend the rest of your lives looking over your shoulder, teaching Maggie to hide who she is? Ethan shook his head. That's not living, Lena. That's just slow dying. Then what do we do? He took her hands in his, holding tight. We fight. We go to that hearing and we tell the truth. We show them that Maggie's thriving here, that she's loved and safe and happy. We make them see that blood doesn't make a family. Choice does. Love does. And if we lose, his jaw tightened. Then we figure out next steps, but we don't surrender before we even try. The 2 weeks before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation. They gathered documents, rehearsed testimony, tried to anticipate every angle Victor's family might use. Ethan sold 2 horses to pay for a lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Chen who'd made a name defending the defenseless in territorial courts. Chen listened to their story without interruption, her expression giving nothing away. When they finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I won't lie to you," she said finally. "This is going to be hard. The Hales have money and social standing. They'll paint you as an opportunist who seduced a desperate woman, and her as an unstable mother who abandoned her child's father over minor domestic disputes." She looked at Lena. "They'll make your abuse sound like normal marital disagreement. They'll suggest you're exaggerating to justify running away with another man." "But we have proof," Lena protested. "The scars, the marshal's testimony, which they'll claim came from other sources. A fall, an accident, anything but Victor's deliberate violence." Chen's voice softened slightly. "I believe you, Mrs. Cole, but belief isn't the same as proof that satisfies a court." "So we're going to lose." Lena's voice went flat with despair. "I didn't say that." Chen pulled out a sheaf of papers. "What we need is character witnesses, people who can testify to Maggie's well-being in your care, to the legitimacy of your marriage, to your fitness as parents. Do you have anyone?" Ethan thought of their isolation, the deliberate distance he'd maintained from town and neighbors. "We keep to ourselves mostly." "Then we change that, now." Chen stood, all business. "You have 2 weeks. I want you visible in town. Attend church, if there is one. Let people see you as a family. Let them meet Maggie. See how she interacts with you both. Build relationships fast." It went against every instinct Ethan had developed over 5 years of solitude, but he understood the necessity. They moved into town for those 2 weeks, renting a small room above the general store. They attended Sunday services, where Maggie's sweet voice singing hymns brought tears to more than one hardened frontiersman's eyes. They shopped at the Mercantile, where Lena's gentle patience with her daughter and Ethan's quiet devotion to them both became the subject of approving gossip. The town, it turned out, had been watching them with interest since the marshal's visit. A lone cowboy taking in a desperate woman and child, marrying her to protect her from an abusive man, raising the child as his own. It was the stuff of frontier legend, the kind of story people wanted to believe in. By the time the hearing arrived, they had a dozen character witnesses willing to testify. The territorial courthouse in Cheyenne was an imposing building of stone and timber, designed to project authority and permanence. Ethan held Maggie's hand as they climbed the steps, Lena on his other side, their lawyer leading the way. Inside, Victor's family waited. His brother James looked like a prosperous merchant, well-dressed, clean-shaven, radiating the confidence of money and position. With him sat Victor's mother, a severe woman in black mourning clothes, and their lawyer, an older man with cold eyes and an expensive suit. The judge, a weathered man named Blackwood who'd reportedly served on the bench for 30 years, called the hearing to order. What followed was 3 hours of the most grueling testimony Ethan had ever endured. Victor's family painted him as a concerned brother who'd only wanted his daughter back, who died before he could reconcile with Lena. They portrayed Lena as an unstable woman who'd kidnapped Maggie in a fit of madness, who'd seduced Ethan into helping her. But Chen was brilliant. She systematically destroyed their narrative with facts. Medical records documenting Lena's injuries, the formal complaint filed months before Victor's death, Marshal Brennan's testimony about the condition he'd found them in, witness after witness from town who spoke of seeing Maggie blossom under Ethan and Lena's care. And then came Maggie herself. The judge spoke to her gently, asking simple questions about her life, her family, her feelings, and Maggie, with the devastating honesty of childhood, told the truth. "My old papa was mean," she said in her clear, small voice. "He hurt Mama and made her cry. He scared me. But Papa Ethan is kind. He teaches me things and never yells. He makes Mama smile. I want to stay with them." The courtroom fell silent. Victor's mother dabbed at her eyes, but whether from grief or shame, Ethan couldn't tell. Judge Blackwood called for a recess, retiring to his chambers to consider. The 90 minutes he was gone felt like years. Ethan held Lena's hand, both of them barely breathing, while Maggie dozed against his shoulder, exhausted by the ordeal. When Blackwood returned, his expression was unreadable. "I've reviewed all the testimony and evidence presented today," he began. "This is a difficult case, touching on questions of parental rights, marital validity, and the best interests of a child." He looked at Victor's family, then at Ethan and Lena. However, certain facts are indisputable. Miss Hart, Mrs. Cole, entered her relationship with Victor Hale freely, but left it in fear for her life and her daughter's safety. The evidence of abuse, while circumstantial in part, is compelling and corroborated. Her marriage to Mr. Cole, while expedient in timing, appears to be genuine in intent and practice. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. "Most importantly," Blackwood continued, "the child herself has expressed a clear preference and demonstrated obvious well-being in her current placement. I find no evidence that returning her to the Hale family would serve her best interests, and substantial evidence that it would cause her distress." Victor's brother half rose from his seat, but his lawyer pulled him back down. "Therefore," Blackwood concluded, "I rule in favor of the Coles. The marriage is recognized as legal and valid. Custody of the minor child remains with her mother and stepfather. The Hale family's claim is denied." He brought his gavel down with a sharp crack. "This matter is closed." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Lena collapsed against Ethan, sobbing with relief, and Maggie woke up asking if they could go home now. "Yes, sweetheart," Ethan said, his own voice rough with emotion. "We can go home." They left the courthouse into spring sunshine, their lawyer shaking their hands with genuine warmth. "You did good in there," Chen said. "Both of you. The judge saw what I saw. A real family, built on love instead of obligation." "Thank you," Lena said. "For everything. For believing us." "Thank you for giving me a case worth winning," Chen smiled. "Now go home. Live your life. And don't let anyone tell you that family has to look a certain way to be real." The ride back to the cabin took 2 days, but they didn't mind. The weather was fine, the landscape was greening with spring growth, and the weight that had been pressing on them for months had finally lifted. They were safe. Legal. A family in every way that mattered. When they crested the final rise and saw the cabin in the valley below, smoke rising from the chimney where a neighbor had promised to keep fires going, all three of them fell silent. This wasn't just shelter anymore. It was home. The place they'd fought for, the foundation of the future they were building. That evening, with Maggie tucked into bed and spring peepers singing in the creek nearby, Ethan and Lena sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," Lena admitted, "for this all to be revealed as a dream." "It's real," Ethan assured her. "All of it, the good and the hard and everything in between. I never thought I'd have this. A real home. A man who treats me with kindness. A chance for Maggie to grow up safe." Her voice caught. "Sometimes I think about that night I knocked on your door, how close I came to walking past, to thinking the cabin was abandoned or that whoever lived here wouldn't help, how different everything would be if you'd turned us away." "I almost did," Ethan confessed. "For about 2 seconds, I thought about pretending I wasn't home, letting you walk on to the next place." He took her hand. "But then I heard Maggie whimper, heard the fear in your voice, and I remembered what it felt like to lose everything because I wasn't there. I knew if I turned you away and something happened, I'd never forgive myself. So you opened the door and changed all our lives." "We changed each other's lives," he corrected. "You reminded me how to live for something beyond grief. Maggie gave me a reason to be better than I was. You both filled spaces I didn't even know were empty. Lena leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her close. They'd been married for months now, had faced death and the law together, but this felt like the real beginning. The moment when the past finally released its hold and the future opened up before them. "What do you want?" she asked softly. "Now that we're safe, now that we can actually plan beyond just surviving." Ethan thought about that. What did he want? The question would have paralyzed him a year ago. Now, with Lena warm against his side and Maggie's soft breathing audible through the open window, the answer came easy. "This," he said simply, "more of this. Watching Maggie grow up, teaching her to ride, to read the land, to be strong and kind, building something with you that lasts, maybe expanding the cabin, adding a room or two, maybe more children if you'd want that, or maybe just this, the three of us, making a life together." "I'd like that," Lena said. "All of it. The building and the growing and the family we're becoming." She tilted her head to look at him. "I love you, Ethan Cole. I don't know when it happened. Maybe that first night when you gave up your bed. Maybe when you stood in front of 7 armed men. Maybe just gradually over all these months. But it's true. I love you." The words settled into his chest, warming places that had been cold for far too long. "I love you too," he said, the declaration feeling both terrifying and inevitable. "I fought it for a while, thought it was too soon or wrong somehow. But you're right. It happened anyway. Somewhere between the fear and the hope, I fell in love with you." They kissed then, long and slow and full of promise. Not the desperate passion of people running from death, but the steady warmth of those building toward life. When they finally pulled apart, the stars had fully emerged, brilliant against the dark canvas of sky. The same stars that had watched over Ethan's solitary grief, over Lena's desperate flight, over Maggie's frightened childhood. Now they bore witness to something different, to healing and hope and the quiet miracle of second chances. Inside, Maggie stirred in her sleep, murmuring something indistinct. Lena rose to check on her, and Ethan followed, drawn by the simple pull of family. They stood together in the doorway, watching their daughter sleep peacefully, safely, loved beyond measure. "Thank you," Lena whispered, slipping her hand into his, "for opening your door that night, for seeing us as worth saving." "Thank you for knocking," Ethan replied, "for reminding me what it means to be alive." They stood there a while longer, two people who'd found each other in the darkness and built something luminous together. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There was a ranch to run, a child to raise, a life to build from the raw materials of survival and choice. But tonight, they had this: peace and safety and love that had been earned through blood and courage and the simple act of one person asking for help and another saying yes. The knock on Ethan Cole's door had come on a cold November night, desperate and uncertain. The answer had changed 3 lives forever, transforming a tomb into a home, strangers into family, and survival into something worth calling a future. And if travelers later passed through that remote Wyoming territory and stopped at the Cole Ranch for directions or water, they'd find a family there, a quiet man with kind eyes, a strong woman with a ready smile, and a bright girl who asked endless questions and wasn't afraid to laugh out loud. They'd see the love in how the man looked at his wife, the pride in how the woman spoke of her daughter, the trust in how the child ran to both her parents without hesitation. They wouldn't know the story of how that family came to be, wouldn't understand the violence and fear and desperate courage that forged those bonds, but they'd recognize something true in the way the Coles moved through their lives, something genuine and hard-won and worth whatever price they'd paid. Because sometimes families aren't given. Sometimes they're chosen, fought for, built piece by piece from the wreckage of what came before. And those families, the ones forged in fire and sealed with blood and blessed by nothing more than stubborn hope, those are the ones that last. The Cole family would endure through seasons and years, through whatever trials the frontier threw at them, because they'd already survived the worst. Everything else was just living, and living, they'd learned, was more than enough.